Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our tactical breakdown series, the Managerial tactical breakdown series, in which we look in depth at a different manager that could be taking over at Arsenal in the near, distant or maybe even never, but fingers crossed in the near future we might see some change. And I am well aware of the fact that right now the Arsenal world is on tenterhooks because there's news around that maybe a managerial change will be coming very, very soon. However, that's not going to stop us from uploading these educational videos for you, because whether or not Emery goes or he stays or whatever happens, it's always important to get more information and more educated and just get some general insight onto some of the different managers that are around Europe and the world, and get the insight and backing and intelligence basically about why we shouldn't go for these guys. And just because the next person's coming in, fingers crossed, maybe, does not mean that in the future one of these guys may not become manager. And I think that's really important. And so I hope that you're enjoying these series and getting educated and clued up on these different coaches. And today is no different. I am once again joined by Tom Midler from the Other Bundesliga Podcast. Now, the fantastic thing about Tom is that I don't really have to talk at all, because he's so good at doing it that I don't have to speak one word. But you're going to hear a little bit from me asking the questions, but mainly sit back, relax and enjoy this in-depth discussion on Jesse Marsch from Bull Salzburg. Really, really interesting manager. And we're going to jump straight into things. If you're enjoying the series, please please subscribe if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show and can join us for our live shows. But let's jump straight in and ask the first question, which is a very simple one. Last time we spoke to Tom, we were talking about Marco Rosa. I want to know, what are the main key differences between Jesse Marsch at Bull Salzburg from when he took over from Marco Rosa?
Hey Tom, greetings from Vienna, Austria. Thanks for having me back on the Gooner Talk. So yeah, recently we caught up and talked about Marco Rosa and his managerial style. This time it's time to talk Jesse Marsch. If you don't know who that is, that's the current Red Bull Salzburg coach, or FC Salzburg as they're called when they play in European competition for sponsorship reasons. So does Jesse Marsch play a kind of adapted Marco Rosa style, or has he brought his own? I think the answer to that is definitely that he's brought his own style. It happens to have some similarities to Rosa. They were both educated in this Red Bull kind of franchise setup, so there's definitely some similarities that run between players and coaches who've been educated in that kind of program. But I have the feeling with Jesse Marsch's character, he would be the kind of manager who would have brought in his own style, whatever Marco Rosa had done before him at Salzburg. And he's been very, very effective so far. He's tended to play a 4-2-2-2, Jesse Marsch. So that means you've got your four defenders, of course, two defensive midfielders, two central midfielders who play a little bit wider, and then two forwards as well. And as that varies quite a lot from Marco Rosa's diamond, even though it has quite similar results and similar effects out on the pitch. So what you get is those two wider midfielders just taking a bit of the burden off the fullbacks going forwards and backwards. Those two wide midfielders have to be very, very fit players. So you have players like Minamino usually in that role, running up and down. Szoboszlai as well, the young Hungarian here at Salzburg. Those guys cover a lot of ground on a good day, kind of going back and forwards, like I said, taking a bit of weight off of the fullbacks. But that means that you've got your two strikers, you've got two more versatile, wider players in behind, and they push up to join a front four in the high press, but they also come back to put a bit of extra defensive help in there when Salzburg are being pegged back. And that's quite different to the way that Marco Rosa had that diamond playing. One similarity, though, is the vertical passing, this sort of direct, quick attack style. Jesse Marsch's side are not bothered to play high possession football all the time, favouring instead a direct transition and a very quick transition from attack to defence, usually quite central as well, which is quite similar to the way Marco Rosa operated. So just getting the ball forward, as soon as they can strike, they will try and stretch the opposition. One big difference, though, from Jesse Marsch to Marco Rosa is that Marsch isn't afraid to then utilise width once they get into that final third. He's okay with going for overlaps, getting crosses into the box. Marco Rosa thought crosses were a bit of a low percentage chance of actually creating an opportunity, so shied away from them a bit more. Whereas Jesse Marsch's Salzburg side have been a bit happier to play crosses. So that's, I'd say, a bit of an overview of the tactical type of football that we've seen Jesse Marsch employ here in his first half season as coach of Red Bull Salzburg.
Now, a lot of people would have actually seen Red Bull Salzburg competing very well in Europe, getting some decent results against Liverpool, in which they just lost, and against Napoli as well. How has Jesse Marsch achieved this level of competitiveness?
Yeah, so Salzburg really sprang onto the international scene or the European scene this season with some great performances against Liverpool, losing 4-3 at Anfield. Some really good, some good games against Napoli as well, although they were defeated at home after many, many years of having an unbeaten home record in Salzburg. They lost 3-2 to Napoli at home. They drew with Napoli away in Italy, and they smashed Genk in the Champions League 6-2 as well. And as we speak, there are still 2 match days left for them to decide whether they will go through in the Champions League. But either way, those results have been really eye-catching. You know, Salzburg have scored the most goals in the Champions League at this stage. You've got Erling Haaland, who's the top scorer in the Champions League at the moment. And it's just really been an explosive debut into the Champions League for both Red Bull Salzburg and for Jesse Marsch himself as a coach. It's his debut in the Champions League, the first American coach in the Champions League. And how has Jesse Marsch got these kind of results and this kind of exciting football at the Champions League level? Part of it, you've got to just say it's a great effort on behalf of the players, the whole team at Salzburg, Jesse Marsch certainly included. They've never played football at this level. Most of the players don't have any experience in the Champions League. And Jesse Marsch has somehow, as a coach, managed to turn that into an advantage, this sort of freshness. Actually, Salzburg failed to qualify at the latter stages of qualifying for most of the past 12 or 13 seasons. It was a long catalogue of errors and embarrassing Champions League qualification results. And he's really overcome that and taken that pressure off this season. They sealed the qualification, and he just gave the players, he must be a very good motivator, and he's given the players this feeling that they're young, they've achieved a lot, most of them have won a lot of things, either here in Austria, they won the Youth League as well a couple of years ago, Salzburg, and that's a pretty impressive effort for an Austrian side to win the UEFA Youth League. And so he's managed to translate all that into a side who are just fearless going out there. And I think that has something to do with his current crop of players. There's an extremely young average age at Salzburg. He's given those players the belief that they deserve to be playing at a higher level and that they can do it. And like I said, just withdrawn that pressure of now you're in the Champions League, you've got to perform. It's just, this is your stage and you guys deserve to be here. And they've really taken to that. And you can see the players, you know, they're playing in Austria. It's a bit of a shop window. They're looking for moves to bigger places. They're looking for you know, the career security of a move to a really, really big club in a few years. Hopefully Salzburg won't stay as a selling club forever, but at the moment that's definitely the position they're in. And you know, we've met on our podcast, the Other Bundesliga, we've met Jesse Marsch, we've sat down with him. He's a really, really nice guy. He's intelligent, he's articulate, he's given us a lot of time and been very welcoming. And you can kind of just see that he's really switched on. He's very, very passionate. He's very focused. And I think he's very good with players, personally. I think the squad really, really like him. He's got that immediate respect, but he's also young and kind of probably almost a more relatable coach to a lot of the young players. And they have really, you know, he's really got them fired up to do his thing and play in his style. And I think immediately they've really believed in what he's doing there at Salzburg, which is no mean feat because, you know, he had big boots to fill when Marco Rosa left. Everybody thought, how can Salzburg get better from this position? And he's achieved it. So I can't say I've got all the answers as to how he's done that, but you've got to say that Jesse Marsch has been doing a great job over here and really utilised, harnessed the potential of a young and talented squad and made that translate into some very exciting and very impressive football in the Champions League. Fingers crossed that they can actually go through. Let's see.
Now, it's all well and good talking about strengths, but it's always important to focus on the other side of things, and that is, of course, his weaknesses. So, Tom, break those down for me.
Okay, so moving on to some weaknesses of Jesse Marsch's coaching. Well, we've only seen him for the first 6 months or so of this season in Austria, actually, in terms of what he's done with Salzburg. And for weaknesses, I suppose it goes hand in hand with what we've seen in the Champions League. We've seen these incredible explosive attacking displays, as we've said, players like Minamino, Hwang Hee-chan, Erling Haaland, they've really caught the eye across Europe this season. And that's partially down to the way Jesse Marsch has got that side set up, and it's partially down to their own incredible talent that they have, you know, within that squad at Salzburg. But although Salzburg are the top scorers in the Champions League, they've also been involved in the most goals total in the Champions League this season. And that means they've scored a lot and they've conceded a bucket load too. And it's cost them, 4-3 against Liverpool, they lost 3-2 against Napoli. They even conceded twice in their rout against Genk. It was 6-2 on that day. So they've struggled at the back. And perhaps that's one thing where you could criticise Jesse Marsch a little bit. Actually, I'm loath to use that as such a weakness, because they really are peerless at the Austrian level. They're far and away, they're the best team in the Austrian league. They do have a challenger this season and last season in Lask, who are doing really well. And if you want to look at some sort of unknown players and some unknown sides across Europe, Lask is a really good one to look out for. They're actually hot on the heels of Salzburg somehow this season. But really, you'd expect it'll be a stroll to the title again for Salzburg in Austria. And that makes it quite difficult for them when they just jump up to the Champions League level. So credit to Jesse Marsch that he didn't want to back away from his philosophy and his style. And he's carried on playing this direct transition, quick pace, attacking direct football, high pressing stuff. And he's done it in the Champions League level. And can you say it's a weakness? Maybe. It has worked and it's got Salzburg a lot of goals. It's also left them exposed at times defensively. Although using that as a weakness, it's a little hard to justify because, they are playing the likes of Mattersburg and Hartberg and things, these small sides week in, week out. And then they're trying to go and play against Liverpool at Anfield the next week. You've got to face the European champions and then a village side. It's quite difficult really to make that jump. But his commitment to that style of football has left Salzburg a little bit exposed at times at the back. So I would say if there is a weakness, if there is a bit of a question mark over anything that Jesse Marsch has done so far, it's whether he can get his side defending at the Champions League level. Mitigating circumstances, though, being the things that I've already mentioned, and also the fact that probably one of their key defensive midfield players who came across from PSG in the summer, he's been out. That's Antoine Bernard. He's been out injured this season, and they've had a few goalkeeping issues as well with injuries and other things. But that may be a weakness if we're looking for one in the style of Jesse Marsch's training so far.
Now, most intriguingly, I want to know how we would see a transition to the Premier League occur. What challenges might he face? How might he deal with a situation like that?
So, the idea of Jesse Marsch transitioning to Premier League football. I think it's always difficult. You always have to be relying on a bit of guesswork when you say, is a manager good enough to transition? Will their style of play suit the Premier League? And I suppose when I look at a manager transitioning to the Premier League, I just like to look at how adaptable they are. That's all I can really do. There have been many great managers who you'd expect to do well in a certain league and they haven't, or managers that have surprised us. So it's really, you have to speculate a little bit. All I can say thus far is that Jesse Marsch is a really hot property in the managerial scene. He won't stay at Salzburg forever. And when he does move, the Premier League certainly will be one of the leagues that come knocking for him. You have to imagine he's box office as well as a US manager. His adaptability this season, we have actually seen it already. I mentioned this 4-2-2-2 that they prefer to play. They've moved from that and they've transitioned between that and some other formations on a few occasions. Most notably, I'll say the game at Liverpool, which you might have caught. You might have caught yourselves over there in the UK, of course. The game being at Anfield, Liverpool 4, Salzburg 3. Marsch's side were 2-0 down early on in that game. And he made quite a bold decision to abandon the 4-2-2-2 and go to a midfield diamond really early on. And suddenly then we saw Takumi Minamino just light up Anfield. And the Liverpool players were chanting for him to be signed. But that for me shows that even on a big occasion, that was Jesse Marsch's biggest managerial game in his career, undoubtedly. And after 25 minutes, he's bold enough to say, okay, everything that I've prepared for, everything that I've worked on for this game, isn't working. It's not happening. I'm going to change it. And they changed to that diamond in a way that they'd never played. They haven't played that diamond at all this season. That was the first hint that we saw of that style. And so that's a big decision for Jesse Marsch. And I take that as a positive. When a manager has the commitment, the trust in himself to make that call, and potentially open himself up to a lot of flack and say, you got the call wrong. You're admitting you got the call wrong and how to start. that to me shows a great level of confidence and a great level of transition, technical ability to change and to adapt to what's going on in the game. And I feel like a manager who's got that in their locker at such an early stage in his career, I feel like that is a very good sign as to how Jesse Marsch might cope if he moved to the Premier League.
Not only the Premier League should we focus on, but I think also it's interesting to talk about how he might fare at Arsenal. So Tom, were a move to Arsenal to materialise, how likely and how successful do you see one of those moves going?
So the classic question, the likeliness of a move to North London. Jesse Marsch as a gunner. I'd like to see it. Personally, I think that would be a very cool move. At the moment, in a way, similarly to Marco Rosa, he's actually at the start of his project here. It's kind of his proving ground in European football. He's been placed in this Red Bull setup at Salzburg. Obviously, he was the Leipzig assistant manager before that, picking up tons of experience. And before that, he was with New York Red Bulls, where he was very successful as a coach. So he's kind of married to the Red Bull school at the moment. Will he then move over to Leipzig? I'm not sure. I don't think that looks massively likely in the next year or two. I can see his next move as a coach being somewhere else. Perhaps even, yes, to the Premier League. I think at the moment, if we're talking about Emery being in an unstable position as Arsenal manager and maybe vacating that post within this season, I think it's too soon for Jesse Marsch. Although I wouldn't be surprised to see his name be thrown into the ring. I think he's got a great position at the moment here in Salzburg to build something. It's he's forging a new path with Salzburg for himself and for the club, and I think that's a really nice position to be in. It's quite a sensible position for him. He's learned German, he speaks German now. He's settled in really well over here with his family, it would seem. And I'd be quite surprised to see him move to England this soon, especially whilst he's got this time. He can have his first few seasons in the Champions League, pick up a few trophies to add to the cabinet. That'll do him the world of good as a coach in the long run, getting that experience under his belt. And at the moment, it's a real win-win at Salzburg. Everything they achieve is sort of greeted with excitement around Europe at the moment. But at the same time, when they don't achieve anything, nobody's really looking towards Austrian football, and nobody's really heard of Salzburg other than this season in the Champions League. So it's a safe playground for Jesse Marsch at the moment, and I think it would be a massive step up to suddenly go to Arsenal, even though unfortunately the Gunners are not currently up there in the top 2 or 3 challenging for the Premier League title. So I think he'd be very good if he did come over to the Premier League at some point, and he's definitely a name to keep on the horizon for the next decade or so, if there are managerial changes afoot at the Emirates. But I'm afraid to say at the moment, I think it's unlikely, and we'll keep him here in Austria for a bit longer.
A huge thank you to Tom for giving up the time to answer some of our questions and give you guys the education that you need on Jesse Marsch. You can follow the Other Bundesliga podcast, I should say, at Other Bundesliga on Twitter. Give those guys some love. Listen to their podcast. Really, really interesting league, the Austrian league, to get involved with and listen to. As Tom said, interesting stuff that Lask, a team that I've heard of in terms of the context of Red Bull Salzburg, but I hardly know anything about that side. And the fact that they're competing up against a huge Austrian side like Salzburg is really interesting, and maybe something that you guys should get interested in too. I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Please drop a comment on what you believe and think about Jesse Marsch and whether you would take him at Arsenal. I will see you again very, very soon, and as always, up the Arsenal.